to the third virtual Big Day In. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands on which we meet today across Australia. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. My name is Shorju Das-Salmon, an intern at the ACS Foundation, and I will be your virtual Big Day In co-host for today. This is the third week of our virtual event series, where we bring you presenters in an online format to talk about the variety of careers in technology. Today, we'll be hearing from two highly experienced presenters, the wonderful Greg Booker, Chief Technology Officer at RACQ, and the amazing Dennis Pryor from Services Australia talking about cybersecurity. Remember to submit your questions during the presentations by pressing the Ask a Question button on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. We'll endeavour to ask the presenters as many questions as time allows, and if we don't get to your question during the session, we'll get it answered post-event and put up all the questions on our website at a later time. Greg is a technology and business executive with over 30 years of experience as a specialist in the integration of technology and business. In his experience in Europe, USA, Asia, and Australia, he has relished the opportunities and challenges presented by emerging technologies and exponential change. Greg has worked for IBM, CSC, Westpac, ANZ, Standard Chartered, and several other organizations. So please join me in welcoming our first presenter for today, Greg Booker from RACQ, with Living in an Exponential World.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Big Day In. We have a lot of work to go through, a lot of presentations, or a lot of slides, so we're going to go through fairly quickly. Please don't hesitate to bring your questions forward. If you look where we are at the moment, you might see it's fairly intense. We've got all the challenges happening in the US, we've got a pandemic happening, and the world looks like it's in a pretty sorry state. The reality is actually far different. The things that are happening in the US have happened before. The civil rights movement in the 1960s was very, very similar today and drove huge changes into the US and the world around civil rights and equal rights for people. Similarly, we had pandemics in the past, the Spanish flu in the 1920s, and since then we've seen Ebola, we've seen swine flu and similar. So all of the things that are happening are almost cyclical in their nature, and it's important to realise that there is a lot of things happening in the world that are very, very positive. If you look at that slide that's up at the moment, that comes from an Instagram site called Future Crunch, and it is absolutely worth spending some time looking at all of the fantastic things that are happening. We won't go through those now because I will run out of time, but it's incredible just the changes that are happening in your worlds. And one of the reasons for that is that we really do live in the most extraordinary time in human history. The changes that we see happening all around us have never happened before. Consider the areas that you see there: income, lifespan, food, energy. All of them are on the improve. All of them are better this decade than they were the previous decade, and certainly over decades prior to that. Look, for example, at the percentage of the world living in extreme poverty. That slide goes back to 1820, where over 90% of the globe lived in extreme poverty, and you can see it rolls all the way forward to almost now, and you can see those percentages falling away. In a similar manner, the level of literacy throughout the world is increasing and will continue to increase as we roll communications more broadly. Global child mortality, and remember, this is global, this is not the Western world, this is the entire world. You can see has fallen away significantly. You have a much higher chance of a child living to the age of 5 and beyond than you had in previous years, certainly at this time 100 years ago. The maternal mortality rates, so babies dying at birth or mothers dying at birth, has fallen down dramatically, almost down to zero. If you look at the times around the 1900, particularly around Spanish flu and those kind of times, almost 900 out of 1,000 children died at birth, which is one of the reasons you saw such high numbers of children born. In a similar manner, if you look at life expectancy, going all the way back there to 1543, you can see that it was pretty static all the way through to 1900s, and then started to really climb until now it's at that level of 81, 82 years. I think a couple of key call-outs there is it would have sucked to have been born in about 1545, where your life expectancy looked like it was about 20. And interestingly, life expectancy in the United States over the last 5 years has actually fallen for the first time in the last 100 years. Key drivers for those things were things like vaccines, various medicines coming through, all of which have driven the life expectancy up. What that's doing also is you're seeing a reduction in the number of children per family. So as families, as we have better health, as we have the vaccines, as we have the better conditions, and it's starting to spread throughout the world, then you're seeing that reduction come through. And what that's going to do is put the cap on the growth in population throughout the world. So you see there we go all the way out to 2070, 2090, and at that point in time we'll be down to 2 children per family, and that's globally, whereas at the moment you can see we're sitting at around that or a mixture there depending upon the countries, but significantly higher than that. So all of those things are driving a better standard of living, and the world that you live in is far better than that of your grandparents, and in turn theirs was better than the grandparents before them. You're seeing more wealth generated, and you're seeing actually a reasonable spread of that wealth across various areas. So I guess the first question for you guys to think about is who will be the first trillionaire? And just for scale there, I've given you a bit. 1 million seconds is 11 days, 1 billion seconds is 31 years, and 1 trillion seconds is 31,000 years. There are 4 names there, and interestingly, all of them are from a technology bent. The days of having oil barons and similar as the leaders throughout the world have come to an end, and all of the major companies and the leaders of those companies are technology based, which bodes well from a STEM perspective. I'll give you an answer. At the moment, the forecast first trillionaire is Jeff Bezos at Amazon, and he's earmarked to become a trillionaire sometime around 2025. The follow-on, unfortunately, is Mark Zuckerberg. He's earmarked around 2030 to 2035. Now, personally, I think Elon Musk will probably surpass them both, and we'll talk about that a little more. The last 150,000 years, whilst we've grown from a humanity perspective, it has been local and it has been linear in its nature. It's been step by step by step as we've gone through. The next 150,000 years are going to be exponential in their nature and global, or even across the solar system in their nature. What exponential means, and some of you will have seen this graph recently with the pandemic, is that you reach a point, an inflection point, where growth moves away from being linear and suddenly starts to climb dramatically, and that is exponential growth. The example there, if you take 30 exponential steps, it's over 1 billion meters, which is the same as walking around the Earth 26 times. So 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, and similar. That level of growth we've seen across a number of industries. I'll give you a quick example here. Netflix. The CEO of Blockbuster Video back in December 2008 had the opportunity to buy Netflix and said, no, they're not even on our radar in terms of competition. In 2009, that's what happened as more bandwidth came available and streaming media became the norm. And in 2010, Blockbuster, having turned down the opportunity, went bankrupt. We've seen many, many companies emerge in the last 10 years, and you'll see some of them there, Airbnb, SpaceX and similar, all of whom have become what we call unicorns, billion-dollar companies from startup, and they've done that by leveraging the technologies that are available and by experiencing that exponential growth. If you look to the picture on the left, that's me. That's what I had to have when I was your age to be able to do all the things that you can currently do in the picture on the right with your phone. It's quite amazing the way that technology has come through. And excuse me, and the iPhone is the first of the true exponential technologies that we have seen. Released in 2008, there are now more iPhones in the world, there are billions of iPhones in the world, and the growth has been exponential in its nature. If you look at companies that have gone through and fundamentally changed the world, Uber has removed us largely of taxi fleets. Amazon has shut down bookstores. Skype is an interesting one, took out long distance calls but missed the pandemic and has been beaten out by Zoom, and Skype is now at real risk. It's probably the first of the second tier organisations to come into threat. Google has shut down encyclopedias. Airbnb is a real threat to hotels and similar. All of those companies have started in the last 20 years, and Amazon is now the largest company in the world with a value of more than $1 trillion. What it's going to mean is a whole bunch of new business models. As you guys go into your careers, it's going to be vastly different to the world of your parents, certainly the world of your grandparents, and the opportunities for you to do things, particularly with a STEM background, will be phenomenal. If you even look at the recent pandemic, you see that most of the critical jobs were STEM-based in their nature. So as we go forward, these kind of things are going to emerge and become very, very prevalent. So let's talk about that for a minute. But before we talk about it, we do have to talk about Elon Musk. He's what you would call a generational individual. He takes on a challenge and he drives it to an outcome. A great example of that is the two pictures at the bottom. Last Friday, testing in Texas, Elon Musk's SpaceX company saw their Starship explode. 2 days later, they launched 2 astronauts to the ISS on their Falcon 9 rockets. Now that's an example of how private enterprise will take risks and will continue to push the envelope and do things in parallel in a way that, say, NASA might not have done in years gone by. A key call out there is that the cost per kilogram is the measure of effectiveness from a space perspective. And you can see that SpaceX have managed to get that down to $2,700 and are pushing it down to under $1,000, down from $54,000 per kilogram to put something in space in the past. So the cheaper it gets, the more reusability you have and the more opportunity you have. So here's your second question. Who can tell me why those 2 names are important? Just read the instructions, and of course, I still love you. While you think about that, ponder the Falcon 9 rockets that are returning and landing. Those things come back into the atmosphere after sending a capsule or a satellite up at over 9,500 kilometres an hour. They're 23 stories high, and they have to land on a platform approximately 450 miles from where they were launched. If you think about the computing power associated with that, it really does show you how complex that is. So the answer to that question, those 2 names are the names of the drone ships that Elon Musk uses to land those Falcon 9 rockets on. Only Elon Musk would come up with those names. So let's talk about connecting the globe. The 5G world, most of you will have seen 4G, and you'll be hearing all kinds of rumours around 5G, that it drives COVID, that it has radiation. None of them are true, but it is the nature of social media these days that people all get a voice. 5G will be at 10 gigabits, it will be significantly faster than the 4G world. How that works is loading down an update to Minecraft or similar will go from being several hours down to a couple of minutes. However, the reason we touched on Mr. Musk before is because of his Starlink exercises and his global internet. In the remainder of this month, he will do 3 more launches of 80 satellites apiece, and across the remainder of this year, he's doing 12 more launches, each one with 80 satellites, with a view to putting 7,500 satellites in orbit. That will give us global internet coverage, and it will give it to us at a higher speed, 10 times faster than our current NBN, and it will give it to us at an affordability as well. So by the end of next year, some areas of the world will be able to utilise the Starlink internet system from a set-top box in a manner similar to what you have if you have Wi-Fi at home now. That's going to be an incredible challenge for a number of organisations, but from a global perspective, it is going to give the world internet capability. We will go from 4 billion people currently using the internet to 8 billion people using the internet. And if you think about what that means, imagine 4 billion new minds being able to utilise the internet. Imagine how many more Elon Musks, how many more Jeff Bezos, how many more Donald Trumps might be sitting out there without access to education, without access to the things that the internet can bring, and suddenly that will all burst open. It will change the way we work, it will change the way, the growth patterns and everything for all of those countries that are in the developing world. You'll see trillions of dollars flow in just from a growth perspective, and arguably the greatest period of innovation that we'll ever have seen in the history of the Earth, because everybody will be connected. It's not just people being connected though. If you think of the Internet of Things, it's actually the Internet of everything. By 2025, there'll be 50 billion devices and 1 trillion sensors. By 2030, 500 billion and 100 trillion sensors. It will be a future of knowledge, and you can know anything you want at any time and anywhere. However, that brings with it a challenge. Current computers cannot process that level of data. So we will have all the data, we will have all the capability and the bandwidth to send it around, but it will sit in a queue on our current computers, which means we are going to move to a different type of computer called quantum computers. Now, I'm not going to attempt to explain quantum computers because I will run out of knowledge and also definitely run out of time. What I will say to you is that they are thousands of times faster than the fastest computers we currently have. The most rudimentary quantum computers, and they exist now in the likes of Google and certainly in defence areas in China and in the United States, and the most rudimentary of them can solve problems in minutes that would take our current computers tens of thousands of years. It's worth looking at, and it's something that's going to emerge across the next 10 or 15 years, driven by the need to process all of that data. So we've got a lot of data coming through, we've got huge amounts of computer power coming through. That in turn is going to drive us towards artificial intelligence. And you're already seeing AI emerging in things like software or AI for facial recognition. You know, China can identify any one of their 1.3 billion citizens in less than 3 seconds. Make no mistake, all the cameras that you see around have very, very similar capabilities. And as we go through and you get driver's license and your photos are taken and similar, they will be loaded into those software bases. Now, there's a very strong positive on that, because you can, people can track where you are and what might have happened to you. But there is also an aspect of it of you are being watched at all times. If you are on social media and you come across one of those apps that says what you will look like in 50 years, don't use it, because you're actually giving the owner of that app the opportunity to have your facial profile. The other thing that will be driven are the likes of autonomous vehicles. And we're going to see a huge lift in autonomous and electric vehicles in particular. In Q1 of this year, the #1 selling car in California was the Model 3 Tesla. And when we've got faster compute, when we've got good artificial intelligence running off the back of that faster compute, then we are going to have a lot of opportunities around not only autonomous vehicles, but autonomous planes, autonomous military equipment and similar. So all of those things are driving, and they're driving us in an interesting direction, because what we need to talk about is robots and what's going to happen with robots. Now I'm going to show you a video. Hopefully it won't be too choppy. And then after that, we'll be able to take some questions.
Robinson, danger! No, Will Robinson, danger!
It's lovely to have you with us. It's slightly disconcerting, but what do you think of the country so far?
I think Britain is brilliant. Splendid architecture, art, technology, and of course the people. I loved meeting the people at London Tech Week at CogX.
You are a little freak, aren't you? This is great.
But see, I feel weird just being rude to her.
Well, let me carry on.
I feel weird about that.
She's not happy. Look.
No.
She's giving you the right desk. All right, easy, Tiger.
No, you're the one who calls her a freak.
I'm about to ask Sophia a question. What's the best thing about the UK compared to America, Sophia?
I love your posh English accent. It really has a nice ring.
Best friend I ever had.
So folks, what I've done in the last 20 minutes is go through something that normally takes about an hour and a half, and I've touched on a few topics in a very, very superficial way. I guess the message I'm trying to convey to you is that you are coming into the workforce at an incredible time. The opportunities you're going to have to do things that are vastly different, the new jobs that will emerge, and the things that you will be doing will be unfathomable from your parents' perspective. So with that, I will finish. I've probably used my 20 minutes just pretty close. I might have time for a couple of questions if you have them.
Yeah, perfect. So we have a few questions, I guess, about Elon Musk. How much do you think Elon Musk is worth at the moment, and why do you think his net worth is going to surpass, as you said, Bezos and Zuckerberg at some point?
Okay, so at the moment, Elon Musk is worth $34.8 billion US. I know that because I looked it up this morning. His wealth is, he has two main sources of wealth, SpaceX and Tesla. The Tesla share price is $700 per share, and Elon Musk made $1 billion last week because the share price went through a certain point and lasted there for 6 months. He's on a bunch of packages there that can see his wealth increase by $55 billion. But that pales into insignificance compared to Starlink. You think if he's got 8 billion people with access to his internet, and he gets 1 billion of those people paying $30 a month for internet access, and you multiply that by 12 and you multiply that by 12 across numbers of years and similar, then you see that Starlink itself has the opportunity to generate trillions of dollars, much of which he has said he will use to fund SpaceX to get us to Mars. But from a personal wealth perspective, it will drive him through the stratosphere.
Fair enough. What are your views on how we can use new technology for good, and how do we ensure that it's not used for evil?
Yeah, look, it's a really, really good question. And I think one of the unfortunate aspects of new technology is it often comes out of defence and comes out of militarisation and weapons production. And there's, honestly, I don't know that there's a way to avoid that. I think there are a lot of really, really good things happening across everything from renewable energies to medicine to space and similar. And I think there are some people in the world now, the likes of Musk, Bezos and similar, who bring with them a slightly different mindset. Many of you will be familiar with the term boomers, and I think the boomers are moving out more rapidly now. And what you're seeing, all of the stuff you're seeing in the world at the moment, in Brexit and in the US and similar, is really the last cry of a generation that doesn't want to go quietly away. You know, the world is shifting, and I think that there are real opportunities for those technologies to emerge, probably for the first time, without them necessarily coming out of a weapons development model.
Absolutely. We have another question here. What ICT sector do you think will have the biggest need for employees moving forward? So AI, cybersecurity, robotics, etc. What do you reckon? I think you just answered the question there. Definitely cybersecurity. Your next presenter will talk to you about that. And you know, as a CIO, as someone who runs the technology for a large organisation, it's security that keeps me awake at night. There's no doubt about that. The bad guys are getting better, and the good guys have to keep up. AI and automation will be the next one. It's going to be the opportunities that come through there are going to be profound, and the chances of doing things from an AI perspective. So if I was going to focus coming into tech now, it would be in cybersecurity, it would be in artificial intelligence, robotics, all of the areas that you thought about. You will spend time working in, you know, systems, financial systems or whatever within organisations, but the real opportunities, the unicorns that you saw before, are about people who took a different path, who chanced their arm and who really went for it. I think there's an old saying that you know, if you reach for the stars, you may not get there, but you're not likely to come up with a handful of mud either. All right. I think that's all we have time for questions. So thanks, Greg, for taking the time out of, I know you've got a really busy schedule, so thanks for taking that time out of your day to actually come to talk with us about the changing world and how that implies the technology industry. Absolute pleasure. Enjoy your day, people, and if you've got any other questions, send them in and we'll get an answer to you somehow. Thank you very much. As with previous weeks, unanswered questions will be sent to Greg, and we'll post his answers on www.thebigdayin.com.au at a later date. Our second presenter today is Dennis Pryor from Services Australia. Dennis works in cybersecurity for the federal government and has witnessed firsthand the rapid growth and development of the cyber world. He'll be discussing the vast variety of jobs in cybersecurity and what you can do to develop your skills in this exciting and high demand industry. So please join me in welcoming our next presenter, Dennis Pryor from Services Australia, with his presentation, The Big World of Cybersecurity.
Well, hello everyone. Yes, my name is Dennis Pryor and I work for Services Australia. You may not have heard of Services Australia. We used to be called the Department of Human Services up until February 1st, at which point we became Services Australia and we incorporated a number of different services during that time. But when we think of Services Australia, or formerly the Department of Human Services, you might think, well, who is that and what do we do? So you may have heard of services such as Centrelink and Medicare, child support. So say, for example, you or a family member or somebody that you know would have gone to Centrelink. Maybe they were looking for some support to find employment, or maybe they needed some support just with the cost of living and so on and so forth. They may have had to go to the doctor to make a claim after getting some services from a medical professional. We are able to provide financial support in that regard, and also things like child support as well. So you've probably dealt with us in one form or another, and we think about who our client base actually is. That's 25 million Australians, and that's a lot of professional data. That's a lot of personal data, I should say, for you, and all of the information that we need to know to be able to help you better. And when we think about 25 million Australians and we think about those financial transactions that happen each year, that's approximately $190 billion that we have to transact each year across Australia to organisations and to families. You might think that's a lot of information and a lot of money that we have to protect. So I'm going to talk today about cybersecurity and about how we as an organisation protect Australia's information and some of that money, or all of the money that I've discussed, to make sure that people who don't deserve it or who don't need that money don't take it from us. So before I go any further on that, I would just be really interested to hear from you about what you think of, or when you hear the term cybersecurity, what comes to mind? What images come to your mind when you think about cybersecurity? And the reason I'm asking that question is that you may have had some preconceptions, or there might be some gaps that you might be interested in finding a little more about. So during my presentation, have a bit of a think about that. Feel free to submit your comments, thoughts, and even any questions about that, and I'll endeavour to answer those throughout the course of this presentation. So I have another question. You don't need to answer this one, at least not to me. Just think about this for yourself. But I want you to consider this scenario. Have you ever locked yourself out of your house? I've done it many times. I've locked myself out of my car. I've forgotten the keys to work and all of that kind of thing. But think, have you ever locked yourself out of your own house? So the question is, how would you get in? Do you have a plan? Like, what would you do if this scenario ever happened? And think about this for next time it happens as well. Does your house have a vulnerability? Are there ways that you can sneak in? Think about what would happen if somebody saw you breaking into your own house, if that's what you chose to do, or is there a better way to secure your valuables? So say, for example, in my house, if I was to lock my keys, if I was to leave a key under the doormat, and that's what a lot of people do, if somebody saw me getting that key from under the doormat, they'd know that next time I'm not home, there's a vulnerability in my house. Another example might be you leave a window unlocked and you slide it open and you climb in. That's a vulnerability that your house might have. Then also might be a vulnerability that you don't even know about, that someone else might try and exploit. And that's what criminals do. They look for vulnerabilities in any sort of environment. And so when I talk about cybersecurity, I talk about the vulnerabilities that are left open in a computing network and a organizational environment. So penetration testers, I want to talk a little bit about some of the roles that we have in cybersecurity, particularly within our organization, and what penetration testers actually do, and some of the requirements that you might want to sort of cover in order to get into that role. So penetration testers, we call them pen testers for short, and they're also known as ethical hackers or white hat hackers. And the reason we use that term is because they are ethical. In other words, they're allowed to do it, and they do it for the purposes not of only just not to steal things, but rather they want to figure out the vulnerabilities before the bad guys do. And as Greg mentioned in his presentation, criminals are getting better, so we need to stay one step ahead, or 2 steps, or 3 steps ahead. So we actually employ hackers whose job it is to basically find these vulnerabilities before the bad guys do. And they use a number of methods and techniques and different skills that they can do, all different types of what you might call vulnerability assessments, and then they present that report to management or security teams whose job it is then to patch it up, to basically make their networks more secure and more fortified. So they can conduct regular tests and regular security assessments, and they might do this over a period of time, or they might test one area, they'll test another area a little bit later on. They do have a specific scope that they need to stay within, and we call those the rules of engagement. So they can't just go, right, I'm just going to break into whatever I want, I'm going to try and find things. They're given a specific area, and they're given certain limitations as well. And so, for example, they won't do that in a production environment, they'll do it in a test environment, so they don't break anything either, because of course we still need to carry on our usual business. So you might think, wow, that'd be so cool. I want to be a hacker. That's what I want to do. How awesome would that be? And let me tell you, it is quite fun. It's just like anything, that when you try to achieve a goal, or if you overcome a challenge, how awesome does that feel? And I will say one thing. I talked to some of the pen testers at work about what it is that drives them. And of course, there is that challenge. It requires things like patience. You don't find things straight away. You might have watched movies or television shows that have hackers, and you hear that classic line, "I'm in." It doesn't necessarily happen that way. And it's not like they suddenly have access to everything that they're looking for. It takes a lot of time to find that vulnerability. If it's easy to find a vulnerability in an environment, then they're not doing very good security. It takes patience. It takes a lot of attention to detail as well. It's a big landscape that hackers have to try to get into, and pen testers spend a lot of time fine-tuning, just looking for the little things. They might see some trends. Sometimes those trends get tested and get patched up. So they've got to just find new and innovative ways of breaking through. And that's creativity. You have to be creative. You have to think outside the square, and definitely outside of the box, about different ways, thinking, right, if someone was going to break into my house, how would they do it? And that's really asking yourself, what should I do to stop people from doing that? And say, for example, if everyone left a key under the doormat, maybe you shouldn't, because that's what everyone's doing. And so that's an example of fortification, and definitely problem solving skills. What went wrong? What did I find? And when I make a report, say, for example, to a management or to an organization saying, look, these are the vulnerabilities, it's not just enough to say that. You also want to make recommendations as well. Solve those problems. This is how I did it. This is how the bad guy would do it. And this is what you should do about it. So pen testers would have, for example, experience in computer networking. They know how computer networks work within an organization, within a broader scale of a large organization, of course, also how the internet works. So they know how some of the little tips and tricks that come with hacking a network. But they don't just do it all manually. Some of it is scripted. You may have heard the expression, if you're going to do it more than once, you script it. In other words, you use some sort of automation or some sort of ongoing process that you want to change. And that's done through scripting to make sure that things are done accurately, and also that things are, if they are repetitive, they don't get boring. Because you ever had to do something more than once and you keep doing it, you tend to get tired, you get a bit of fatigue. Repetition fatigue can absolutely cause a lot of problems. So you script it, and that's where programming is as well. And becoming more familiar with programming, and there's all different languages, and that's one of the questions I get a lot, and I'll talk about that now. What language should I learn if I want to get into cybersecurity? The answer is yes, all of them. Probably, definitely ones that are related to web, how things like how computers work, PowerShell. Learn how Linux works. Python is a fantastic one. A lot of cybersecurity applications use things like Python, particularly for scripting and for automation. I would recommend having a bit of a research, talk to cybersecurity specialists, see what languages they're proficient in, but the ones that I've mentioned are a good place to start. Moving along now. Cyber intelligence analysts, that's a very interesting role. You might think, is it all technical or is some of it non-technical? And the answer is, yeah, it's both. There are roles that are definitely technical, like penetration testers, for example, programming and scripting and all of that kind of thing. But we also have roles which are still technical, don't get me wrong, but we also have people whose job it is to have a look at the landscape. Now, you can see in the presentation that I'm sharing, this image here is actually our operations center, and I got permission to share this with you. This is actually a highly secure environment, and you're not normally allowed to go in there with a camera, and definitely not with your phone, but we got special permission to share this image with you. So we actually had to make sure that nothing of vital importance was on any of those screens. I want to tell you a little bit about what you're seeing in this picture. So the people in here, we call that the grid, or the operations center. It is 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So yes, we're open Christmas morning. We're open every day of the year. We never sleep. Those guys in there do 12-hour shifts, 12 hours on, 12 hours off. You'll do some day shifts, you'll do some night shifts, and you'll also get days off. So you're not there all day, every day, but there is always someone in there. And they work across a number of different responsibilities within that operations center, and that's based in Canberra, I might add. So they do monitoring. So one of the things that they do is they have a look at what traffic is coming through, what traffic that we are receiving, and also what traffic that we're sending out, making sure that it is legitimate, not receiving any sort of traffic that might be harmful to our environment, anything that is anomalous or doesn't look quite right. One of the things that we do is then we escalate that and we investigate and see what's going on, and we might forward that to other teams for analysis. We do intelligence analysis as well. One of the things that we do is we check at what's going on out in the world. For example, if your neighbour got broken into, you'd want to find out a little bit about what happened, because you might be next. There might be a new gang of thieves in town hotspotting your area. We want to find out what's happening in the environment, and that's in the world. So we actually have intelligence analysts whose job it is to check the media. And we call that open source intelligence, and that could be things like social media, could be news channels, it could be things that are going on around in the world of cyber. And we use that information to go, oh, we just found out that somebody who uses this software, a vulnerability was found and it was exploited. And we use that software, we check, do we use that software? Are we patched for it? Are we open to some sort of attack? And if we are, we certainly patch that up as quickly as we can, or we make certain changes to make sure that that vulnerability isn't exploited. And that's part of what pen testers do. So we also talk with pen testers across the world. It's important that we report. So any reports that we do we have to report to within our organisation. We might need to report that to other government organisations and some of our intelligence partners as well. And we also have what's called incident response, and that's actually part of what our role is as well. And that's not necessarily if we have like a major breach or anything like that. It's anything that we identify that could be a potential problem. We need to respond to that. An example of that is we might just get a whole bunch of traffic, which is just really, really bizarre. We might go, okay, nothing serious has happened, but we don't want this to continue to happen. And we want to find out what might be happening. And so incident response, their job is to come up with what exactly is happening, generate that report, generate a response to that, apply that response, and then we get ourselves more fortified against any sort of potential threat that may happen out there. All right, a question for you guys. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this. Is what subjects are you studying right now that you believe might lead to a career, sure, that's to say, in cybersecurity? You might think, oh, I'm not doing anything sort of technical at the moment or any sort of IT. I'd still be interested. So one of the things that you might like to share is, what are you studying right now? And I can tell you, I don't want to give sort of too many answers away, but because cybersecurity is such a broad industry, I can guarantee that you're studying something that cybersecurity can use. Let me share that with you for sure. So definitely think about that. And the reason for that, strangely enough, is we talked a lot about cybersecurity as a technical industry, and certainly it is, there's no question about that. But there are also non-technical factors that we have to bear in mind, and that is the human factor. The human factor is really interesting as well, because you think about what is it that we're really protecting against. And of course, and one of the things that Greg mentioned in his presentation is things like artificial intelligence. And that's a question I get a lot as well, is does AI play a part in cybersecurity? And the answer is absolutely it does, more and more so as time goes on, as that with penetration testers, for example, they are humans behind the keyboard. But as creativity starts to stem out there, humans are being removed. But I want to share two really important factors with humans. One, people are our strongest asset, and we look after our people, and when we make sure that they are as effective as possible as they can be at any time, and we do that providing proper training, and we do that by making sure that they understand what their role really is, and we encourage them and we support them as best as we can. The second factor, though, is that people are our biggest vulnerability. And isn't that an interesting point as well? Is that people, for whatever reason, might have missed something, or they're not paying attention to what they're doing. Say, for example, you might check your emails, you check your inbox, and there's an email in there that says, oh, if you click on this link, you might win something. Or if you go to this website, you can find information about something that's happening, and that's called phishing. And phishing is a very, very big thing. And I can tell you off the top of my head about the three biggest phishing campaigns. The first one is to do with COVID-19, of course. And if you click on this, you can find out more information about how you can protect yourself. And people click that link, and next thing you know, your computer's not working properly. You might want to, another big one had to do with the bushfires that Australia experienced recently. And before that, it had to do with winning prizes, or it might be finding out more information about some sort of hot topic that's going on at the time. That might be through your email, your inbox. It could be through social media, any other things like that as well. So apart from providing training, we also have an awareness program. So we actually have a team within our cybersecurity branch called Cyber Influence. And our influence is part of two main factors. One, we work with the community. So for example, we present at the Big Day In and we talk to people about how important it is to be cyber smart. We also work internally with our own staff. And say, for example, if you've ever gone into a Centrelink branch and you talk to somebody behind the counter there, we need to make sure that that staff member is aware of what it means to provide information appropriately, not to click on certain links, because any staff member may open an email which then opens a huge vulnerability into our networks. So awareness is a huge factor in making sure that we remain safe. So it's not just the technical side. One of the things that cyber criminals try to do is break in through people, and that's called social engineering. And social engineering, for a lack of a better term, is what con artists use to gain your trust. So say, for example, I might look legitimate, I might sound legitimate, and I ask for information and you go, well, this guy's the real deal. You provide me that information and then I can exploit that information and steal that from you. So just be mindful that, say, for example, if you're using social media and you see a page that might, give you some information, that you would then go, well, what type of garlic bread am I? And you start answering questions. For example, what was your mother's maiden name? And, who was your best friend in primary school? These challenge questions can be used to exploit you. So just be mindful that that's called social engineering, and you basically can't trust anyone. One of the questions that we get asked a lot in cybersecurity is, are you cynical of everybody and are you always on alert? And yeah, we should be. And I would encourage you to be alert as well, that sometimes if something's too good to be true, it probably is. The last part we talk about on this particular slide has to do with practice, and we have to practice our skills quite a bit. So say, for example, one of the things that doesn't happen at work very often is major disasters. We don't get like huge bad things happen all the time at work. So what happens if something does happen? We need to keep our skills up. So one of the things that we do every year, and you may see from the background here from our cyber war games, we actually run something called the cyber war games. I've got some pictures prepared. I'm just going to share with you now. This is our Lego city called Shell Cove. It's actually a little bit larger than that now, but this is the best picture that I want to share with you. Now, you might think that's just Lego. What is that got to do with cybersecurity at all? And unfortunately, I'm not able to really zoom in on that, but I will say this. That whole city is wired up. It's actually connected to a cyber range. It's all computer controlled. And I'll just start a little bit from the left. You may see here those fans just below those screens there. They're actually wind turbines, and they actually form part of Shell Cove's energy infrastructure. That, if it's an energy infrastructure, provides power to computers and to systems. We also have at the back, you can't really see it, there we have a solar panels as well. And on the far right, you see that little white fan there, just above the water there. That's a hydroelectric dam. All of those are controlled by computers. Those can get hacked. We have brownouts, we have blackouts as well, because there are lights all the way through the city. You can see a bit of a train line that goes through there. You can see an airport there. Those are all computer controlled as well. So it's an internetworked, what we call smart city, that represents critical infrastructure. There are 6 major, what you might call infrastructure sectors that run their way through Shell Cove. So I've mentioned energy and transport already. There's also banking and finance. We actually have a bank in there that has a safe and a vault that can actually be hacked into. We have telecommunications. So there's actually a Wi-Fi range that actually covers the whole city. And the reason behind that is how all of the different organizations communicate amongst each other. And I'll talk about the games as well. we have emergency services, we also have retail sector in there as well. And all of that is wired up. And you think about what these organizations would be protecting. Obviously, there's the physical infrastructure that you see in the city, but also things like people's personal information, financial transactions, and their own intelligence that they need to maintain. And so we had that city set up. I'll show you the next screen. These are some people who play the game. So these are people that we invited in from all over Australia, and we took cybersecurity experts from government organisations as well as the private sector, such as banks, insurance companies, retail outlets, telecommunication providers, energy providers, and their job in this instance for last year's games were to find the vulnerabilities that existed in Shell Cove, and their job was to do a vulnerability sweep and a network sweep, look for those vulnerabilities, and then exploit them, which is pretty exciting. And their job was to basically break through and hack Shell Cove, and these are some other people as well. Now, I'm not exactly sure what they're doing in each of these particular pictures, but I can tell you about some of the things that they definitely had to do. We had them in teams of about 6 or 7 people. They all did different roles. So they weren't all sitting there just on a computer, just tapping away at the keys, trying to find these vulnerabilities. Some people were performing different tasks. And that's really what cybersecurity is all about, assigning roles, using people's specific skill sets and strengths to try and find those vulnerabilities, then finding out what that vulnerability actually did, finding out the best way to exploit it and how to get out again without getting caught. So we used Shell Cove as a city. We don't mind if you break it. As a matter of fact, it was called, our last event was called Operation Tsunami, and the final outcome, and you remember the hydroelectric dam that was there, that actually burst open and flooded Shell Cove with, well, virtual water. It was actually Lego pieces representing water to destroy the city, and that was the ultimate outcome, and it was achieved, which is pretty exciting. The event goes for 5 days. So we get these guys coming in, we get them in, and it's like a normal work day. They come in, they get to have a look at the environment, find out what's going on. We don't give it to them easy. They actually have to work for it. And the guys who built the war games, the guys who built Shell Cove, are cybersecurity experts. They built the networks, they built the range, they built all of the different security measures as well. And the job is to beat them. And these guys, I can tell you, it wasn't all fun. There was frustration. Sometimes people got pretty upset, but that's the world of cybersecurity. It's not easy. If it was, we'd be in big trouble. And that's really what it comes down to. So another question I get quite often is, what's it like to work in cybersecurity? I've been in cybersecurity now for about 2.5 years, and I can tell you that no 2 days are the same. There's always a lot of variety, and I really do enjoy it. I've worked in a number of different roles. I've worked in cyber influence, is where I started working with schools. I started working with the community about awareness. I've worked in incident response, and I've worked in cybersecurity analysis as well, doing things like what we call threat intelligence, whose job would be to basically look at what's happening in the world and create intelligence products to then be able to disseminate that down to our teams to then come up with different responses to, okay, we've identified this vulnerability in the world. Let's make sure that we don't get that same thing exploited if it applies to us. The landscape's always changing, and the key is to stay ahead of that change. So there's always a challenge. There's always something that's new. There's always something that's going on somewhere. And so I work with really good people. I work with really intelligent people. And the fact is that if every day was the same, then we wouldn't need to exist. And the fact is that, and this is something that Greg mentioned as well, they're getting smarter. The bad guys are getting smarter. They're using better technology, and they're also coming up with better ways of doing things. So there's a lot of growth. I'm running a bit short on time, so I'll just quickly talk about getting into cybersecurity. If you really want to get into it, there's a number of ways. Definitely university. Have a look at different university courses in cyber, and that could be things like programming and computer engineering. TAFE course is another good one. You can do certificate for in cybersecurity. You can do it. I think you can actually now do a diploma of cybersecurity, an advanced diploma. Certainly investigate that. There's graduate programs for people who have completed those programs as well. You can absolutely have a look at getting employment within government organisations. Also, apprenticeship and cadetship programs through the Digital Transformation Agency. And I'll give a bit of a plug for them because I believe that the applications are currently open. So to do that program, the apprenticeship program, you have to have at least done year 12 or be presently doing year 12. Cadets, you need to have done your first year of uni. So just be mindful on that. And there's also heaps of free online courses and tutorials just to get your skills up and things like that. It is a worthwhile career. I will never ever leave cyber now. I've done other things beforehand, but cyber is where I'm going to stay. I really do enjoy it. It's broad, it's very open. It's not just like a very narrow niche market. It's a huge, absolutely growing industry. And as Greg said before, cybersecurity is growing, and Australia is looking to fill about 20,000 jobs each year for young people alone, and it is very rewarding. Thank you very much. Now, do we have time for questions?
Yep, we'll have time just to go through a few questions pretty quickly. The first question we've got, are state-sponsored hackers and state-sponsored threats a problem for Service Australia?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They're a problem for everyone. The reason that they're a problem is because they're state-sponsored, which means that they get backing from their nation or from a very large organisation, which means that they're well-funded, they're well-resourced, and they're definitely, and when I say resource, it's not just technical resources, it's time, it's people. These people get fully trained. So are they a problem for us? Is absolutely yes. We certainly won't be casual in response to state-based threat actors and threats in that regard. So yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, by the way.
Another one, so you were talking about like ethical hackers and penetration testers earlier. What happens when penetration testers leave the Services Australia and they move on somewhere else? Are they able to use that information that they've learnt about Services Australia against your organisation?
Well, legally, no. But what I will say is this. We hire people because of the experience that they've brought with them. And the reason we hire these people is because they've gained this information. But one of the things that we do is we get them to sign documentation to make sure that any information that might be personal information or anything that might be a vulnerability that we're aware of or a way that we use our network, if they take that information with them and they use that against us, that is a criminal act, and we make sure they don't do that. And in many cases as well, we do limit the information that we give to certain penetration testers, particularly contractors, to make sure that they cannot exploit that, because that's a huge weakness. So say, for example, if you move out of a house, they usually change the logs.
Absolutely. And final question that we have time for today. How can you rectify and fix system vulnerabilities without actually having to take down the system altogether and impact the people who are using the system?
Quite often, there's a number of different ways to do that. One is that sometimes a patch can be applied fairly quickly. So if there is a disruption, it'd be very, very minor, and it might just be that certain things might be offline for a short period of time. It might be also having a secondary backup system as well, that people just go over to the current system that is running that has already had that patch applied, so that once that's done, we can apply a patch to the existing, and we might call the main system that people are using. In some instances as well, we end up just coming up with a brand new system in many cases, just to make sure that we are updated. Unfortunately, though, there is no completely foolproof way around it. One of the biggest things that we definitely try to do is maintain a high level of service, because we are a customer service, customer facing organisation. So our customers do come first, and that is in response to making sure that they do receive a timely service, because it's about their welfare. But we don't want to do that at the expense of their information getting leaked to bad sources. But we do our best to make sure that we are 100% online for them as best as we can.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dennis, for coming to our virtual Big Day In and talking to us. We always get a lot of questions and a lot of queries about cybersecurity. So your expertise and knowledge in this industry is actually really useful for students who are trying to decide where they want to go within IT.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
As with Greg, Dennis will aim to answer all his unanswered questions, and they will be posted on our website at a later time. Don't forget as well to check out the ACS Foundation's Career Wheel. If you want to find out more about the variety of roles in technology, you should be able to see the Career Wheel and the link on the website, and the link for the website on your screen right now. We'd also like to thank all our sponsors who made this virtual Big Day In possible. along with our two presenters today, Greg and Dennis. We hope you all enjoyed this week's virtual Big Day In. Next week, our presenters are Roger Lawrence, the CEO of Achiever, and Krista Jordan from the Australian Film, Television and Radio School. The link for the 10th of June session will be sent to all your teachers and they can distribute it to all of you watching at home. Don't forget, if you want to re-watch this presentation or some of the presentations from past weeks, they are posted on our website or will be posted on our website later today at www.thebigdayin.com.au. Just click on the past events tab. I look forward to seeing you next week on Wednesday at 11 AM Australian Eastern Standard Time. Until then, stay safe.